To start with, Cloudian, probably most people haven't heard it. We're a company. What's important about us? We started in 2011, and we focus completely from the beginning on S3 object storage. So we said that's the coming thing. At that time, it wasn't so clear because Amazon was not that dominant at that time, and we did the right decision. And what happened is to cut a long story short, the CIO of NTT, the largest MSP in Japan, they had a problem with a tsunami at that time, and they said, "Oh, we have the wrong storage and backup policy." So they started talking to us, and for the first 3 years, Cloudian was just developing their product for NTT and made it scalable. Really millions of users, petabytes, admin, billing, all this stuff that a large MSP needs. And then NTT was also the first investor, and now we've grown quite a lot. We're 250 people worldwide, and we have very good tech investors. So Cisco Systems, Intel, Lenovo, NTT. These are all investors in Cloudian, and another big IT company that we can't mention. So it's a technology-driven company. So what do? We do object storage, and I will jump into the slides, hopefully. Let's see this one. Yeah. So what do? We offer a very simple way where you can start very small to build an S3 object storage. And typical customers are universities, MSPs, large enterprise customers that want to keep the advantage of the S3 protocol. What is the leading protocol from Amazon, Google, and everybody is going for that, but they want to keep it on a private, and they want to start small, and they can scale in the exabyte range. And we can offer all kinds of models. You can build a private cloud, a hybrid cloud, and we're going to show you a little bit more of that a little bit later. Where does Cloudian fit in? We're really not the solution. That changed a little bit because we also have Flash now, but traditionally we were the solution really for the data capacity driven. So we work very well with other backup solution and everything together, and we're more the capacity driven use case. So you see on the right-hand side, what are the typical use cases? So big data lakes, video is a very good use case, everything backup, large storage files, and we have a couple of everything that's very fast. It's really not the perfect use case for us. So it's, I would say 80% of the data is really a perfect fit for Cloudian. And we're going to show you a little bit more about the Cloudian product family. Roberto, I don't know, maybe you can cover that one because it gives a whole overview of what we do and how we interconnect also with some of the others shown on.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Carsten. Hello, everybody, by the way. So we have a certain number of products that are our, let's say, our family of solutions. Actually, the core product is called Cloudian Hyperstore, is at the center of the slide. So Hyperstore is basically an on-premises object storage solution. I guess most of you are familiar with object storage, but in a nutshell, it's a different way to address storage needs. So your application is speaking with a cluster of nodes, that's the object storage, and the protocols that are being used normally is HTTP. So you perform I/O through HTTP protocol using some APIs. Namely, the APIs we support are the S3 APIs, so the simple storage service, the Amazon AWS APIs, and we guarantee compatibility with the Amazon S3 protocol. So this means that whatever works with AWS works also with Hyperstore. So Hyperstore is the core, is the main solution. Now, we also have other two, let's call them components of the solution that can be put together with Hyperstore to provide other functionalities. For example, we have Hyperfile, that is basically able to provide file protocols on top of objects. So what means is that if you have some applications that cannot speak the S3, the API language, then you can use Hyperfile to provide the NFS or SMB, so Windows or Linux, Unix Word kind of protocols to store then your data into Hyperstore. So Hyperstore, the core, the cloud on-prem, and then Hyperfile for some data, for example. You can have a mix of the two, some data going straight to S3 and some data going through the file system protocols via Hyperfile. And then we have HyperIQ is on the left. HyperIQ is, let's say, a complementary product that is enabling you to enhance the monitoring and reporting and analytics about Hyperstore and very soon also about Hyperfile. So HyperIQ is another dashboard that is allowing you to have more granular and to monitor and to report about more parameters. So Hyperstore and Hyperfile, they have their own interfaces, but HyperIQ can be like a top on everything and provide you the global view, also measuring, for example, the transactions, measuring the consumption of resources, and so on and so forth. So that's about the products in the center of the slide. Now, how these products are deployed or how they work together. Basically, we use different platforms, so we can deploy our products on appliances. That is basically everything supplied by Cloudian, can be Hyperfile, Hyperstore. Not for HyperIQ, because HyperIQ is always installed in a VM eventually, or on a Windows system, for example. It's just the software. But Hyperstore and Hyperfile, they can be deployed on appliances. So in this case, you get the full package from Cloudian. We will see something about the appliances in the next slide. And then you can also deploy as virtual machines. We support mostly VMware, but we also support other platforms, for example, KVM for Hyperfile, also Nutanix AHV for both Hyperfile and Hyperstore. And then it is in the platform part, but actually we could run in the public clouds, but doesn't make too much sense. Normally we are the on-premises part, but we can talk with the hyperscaler, so the public clouds. So what we do, Hyperstore or Hyperfile, for example, can tier data to one of these clouds. That means that you can have a copy of data locally with your on-premises, and then you can have tiering or a copy of data in one of the public clouds that we mentioned over here. And this public cloud could also be a Polish provider that is using Hyperstore, for example. So you can have a Polish provider offering S3 as a service via Hyperstore, and then your local Hyperstore can tier to the remote Hyperstore at the provider. So that's about the platforms. And then what you see on the top, the extensions basically are some of the integrations that we have with other solutions. What the slide means is that we support every kind of I/O coming from application that uses file system protocols, SMB or NFS. That's just a standard NAS, let's say, through Hyperfile. We support S3, so the application can write S3, fine, where we can work with every application that talks S3. But we also have specific extensions or integrations for some environments. For example, we have an operator for Kubernetes, so Kubernetes can use Hyperstore as S3 storage, or we can have extensions for VMware. So VMware, for example, the vCloud director is a component used for cloud services, normally at service providers. The vCloud director has a portal and can talk with Hyperstore using some administrative API. So your users will go through the vCloud portal, and in the backend, the vCloud portal is able to provision and provide storage S3 or file using the integration. So that is pretty much the overview of what we can offer, and I think it's enough for an introduction. So next slide, maybe you can, I think is yours, this one, Carsten.
Okay, I mean, it just gives an summary of the advantages of Cloudian. So you can really scale easily. You can do it all in one global namespace, and as mentioned before, you can really build a private cloud. You can do a hybrid cloud model with the big hyperscalers, but also with local providers. We have this, for example, customers in Germany that are enterprise customers, they peer then to their local service providers as a second option or a backup option there, and they distribute the workloads depending on privacy to like a local provider, but also to AWS or others for other workloads. You can do this with geo distribution. And the nice thing, you can start very small. We're going to cover that in a minute when we go through the options. And you can do the cloud integration that Roberto already talked about. So the key features is, why is Cloudian really so successful, is because we are the ones with the highest capability on the S3. So we're the closest to the S3 standards of Amazon, and we see this in every POC. We normally win 80–90% of all the POCs, unless it gets political. It's just where from the feature set the most advanced there. We also have the file option and the object storage, and you can scale, and it gets interesting on the policy. You really can do it on a bucket level, so you have a lot of possibilities to fine tune the system. And mentioned before, you can also scale out into the public cloud. And an interesting one is we also offer the object lock feature. That's very important for ransomware. And we were like the launch partner for VMware. It just gives you an idea. We're always like the first one. So when the product came out, only Cloudian and AWS were both companies that supported the VM object lock at that time. And I mean, Kubernetes support. And the cloud-like cost, I know we talk about cost later, but I would even say we have a lot of large customers in the enterprise and the MSP space that can buy about for half the cost of the public cloud or of the hyperscalers or AWS and Google. And that's a nice use case for MSPs that they build their own offering and say, I buy it for half the cost, and I add my local support in local language. I can store the data in Poland, and I can offer on the same technology a local service. And we have large customers like in Russia, like Dataline. We have in Germany Plus Server, 1&1, who are the out of the top 3 largest MSPs in Germany, 2 use us. Or we were building like the Swiss cloud for all the universities. So that's a kind of common offering. With that, I really would turn it over to you, Roberto, again, for a little bit more of the technical possibilities.
Yeah, definitely. So we just want to introduce you a little bit the concept of how the Hyperstore cluster works and how we implement some of the features, like, for example, the scalability or data protection. The goal of this slide actually is to give you the idea of how simple and complex things can be at the same time. And what I mean is that even when you go into a cost model, we will see later some slides about the cost model, but the cost is very influenced by what you want to achieve in terms of protecting data. So 1 site, 2 sites, 1 copy, 2 copies, n copies. So all these features together can influence heavily your decision. Sometimes you cannot have any flexibility because you must respect some regulations. For example, you must have 2 sites for disaster recovery. That's done. So you have a certain number of nodes. But sometimes, for example, starting very small with the minimum number of nodes, we will see how much we need, could be a good choice for having a very small initial investment, but probably it's not the best choice on the longer term, because the cost per gigabyte net stored is higher, because with less nodes, you are less flexible in how you protect your data, okay? So for example, in place of using 3 nodes, you use 6 nodes, the initial cost will be double, but the real cost per stored gigabyte could be much less, because you can use different protection policies and you have less copies, less redundancy to protect your data. Let's start from the beginning. So you see on the left here, we have the what they call a cluster. A cluster is just a set of nodes. The minimum is three nodes. And with 3 nodes, you can build your own hyperstore, let's say cluster with providing service and data protection and redundancy, okay? That means that with 3 nodes, you can have one node going down. You still have 2 nodes because you have the quorum, so the cluster and the service is up, okay? That means that you have automated failover, you have all these kind of features that comes with the cluster solution. Now, from data storage efficiency point of view, with 3 nodes, we can only support having 3 copies of data, because we don't use any RAID protection, we don't use anything else, we just protect with our redundancy. That means 3 copies of data. Of course, you lose 1 node, you still have 2 copies. So you have, with 2 nodes, you have data and service. You lose 2 nodes out of 3, you still have 1 copy of data, but you don't have the service. So you have your data safely in a node, but you cannot expose that because you don't have enough nodes to provide the service. Okay, that's just an example of the basic building block. Now you can scale out the same site. So the single site can become 6 nodes, 9 nodes, 10, whatever you, the amount of nodes you can add is very flexible. You can start with a single node, or you put a bunch of nodes depending on what you want to achieve. So you can scale the same site and you become more redundant for sure, or you have more capacity. Or you can scale to another site or other sites. So let's say you start with 1, we add a second site, a third site, and then we can protect data across multiple sites. So you can also not only cope for the failure of a node, but you can also cope for the failure of one site, and the service is still up. The number of nodes you need, it really depending on what you want to achieve. The minimum number, as I said, is 3 nodes per site. So 1 single site, 3 nodes, 2 sites, 6 nodes, 3 sites, 9 nodes. And then you can play with the different policies. The third step you can do, as I mentioned, in place of having your own disaster recovery, you don't want to have a second site with hyperstore installed because you don't want to invest in the infrastructure, but you might just want to have a copy of data, so disaster recovery. That you can do by tiering, so copying your data or moving your copying. So tiering means both having a second copy or just move from local to remote to a public cloud. Again, we support all the public players like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or another S3 cluster based on Hyperstore. So for example, a local Polish provider that has Hyperstore and can offer you S3 capacity. And in this case, you pay the consumption and eventually transactions. So that is how we implement the cluster. Just a very small parenthesis about how we protect the data. As I mentioned before, we make multiple copies of data, or we can make what is called erasure coding. Erasure coding is like a RAID, if you're familiar with the RAID on disks. We do the same at software level. We take one piece of data and we cut some slices. For example, if I say erasure coding 4 plus 2 means that you take your data, your object, you make 4 chunks. These are data chunks. Then you calculate 2 parity chunks and you have 6 chunks. So you need 6 nodes, but then your storage efficiency is 4 data chunks out of 6, so is 1.5. While with 3 copies, with 3 nodes, you have 3 times the capacity to store the same data. And again, you can mix and match all different policies. Each bucket you create can be linked to a specific policy, and you can have multiple policy in the cluster. Basically, you can decide, I want some data to be only local, no problem. You make 3 copies locally or erasure coding locally. I want some data to be in DR, so you make a copy in DR, whatever you want. Or you can make tiering for some other data to the cloud, and everything can be mixed in the same. So that is just an overview. I don't want to go too deep, but if you have questions, you can ask in chat. So I think you can go next slide. Yeah, maybe Carsten, if you want to take this on the.
Let me just, from the way you can deploy Cloudian, you have a few possibilities. So you can either buy Cloudian appliances, and we have, Roberto will show you what type of appliances we have. So we use standard technology, so it's Quanta, Supermicro, or Seagate below it. And then you get everything from Cloudian, and the model is relatively simple. You buy the appliance, and then you buy the support with it, and then we have a flat fee for professional services. What you can also do is you can buy software only. So that means you can use your own service, and we are very open. We have a couple of minimum requirements, but that's very straightforward. So you can use your server farms there, especially on the ISP, MSP side, and you use software only, and literally you buy the amount of terabytes or petabytes, and then you buy the support also for 1, 3, or 5 years. So these are the two basic options. We have a few more with like based on VMware, but these are really the two main options how you can get Cloudian software. And Roberto, you might want to talk a little bit about our appliances, and as said, the same you can do also on your own hardware.
Yeah, I will we'll talk about it. Then there is a question in the chat. I will answer the question just after the appliances, so we can make a small stopover. So the appliances, as Carsten mentioned, we have several models. The key point is that you choose the right model based not only on capacity, but also on the protection policy you want to implement. Just to give you an example, if you have 1 petabyte of raw storage and you buy 3 big appliances, you can make only 3 copies. So you can only use the replication to store that. But if you have the same 1 petabyte by using 10 smaller appliances, then you can use a ratio coding 8+2. So your efficiency is 80%, is much better. The other choice could be about capacity and performances. So for example, having 3 nodes gives you 3 times the single node performance, regardless if it's big or small, doesn't matter, because the CPUs and the RAM are the same. But with 10 nodes, you can have 10 times the performance of a single appliance. So this might give you more performances. So the choice is not always about capacity, it's also about the protection policy you want to implement, the number of sites, and the performances. All these things together make your appliance choice the best. Okay. Now, about appliances. We have the small ones on the top left corner. This is called the HyperStore 1600. Is 1U Intel box with 12 disks, and the disk can be from 10 to 14 terabytes. So the capacity is 120 to 168 raw capacity. Then, of course, the net capacity will be based on the policies we described before. We also have an all-flash offer. All-flash is mostly targeted for high performance environment and is mostly suitable when you have small files. So small files, are kind of killer for all the storage systems, especially in object storage. So that is where you might leverage the all-flash capabilities. Of course, there is a cost because it's based on flash technology, but can serve a good purpose. So for example, when I say small files, is that if you have, imagine you have a lot of thumbnails from an application that are like a few kilobytes inside, that probably needs all flash if you want to achieve very high performances. If you have something like 200 kilobytes, 500 kilobytes, 1 megabytes, then probably flash is not needed for that. Then we have the large appliances, the one you see on the bottom. These are 4 units appliances. They have, in the case of the 4100, they have 70 disks. In the case of HyperStore Extreme, this is a box we do with Seagate, and it has 96 disks inside. So it's very big. It's almost 1.5 petabyte. And the big appliances, just for your information, they are dual node. So they have a large capacity, but they have 2 blades for processing power. So they count as 2 nodes in terms of cluster, of HyperStore cluster. So maybe next slide, and I will just, I don't go through that. I already spoke about this just to show you how the appliances look like and which are the technical specifications, so capacity, CPU and memory and network. Just one note, when you want to buy the software only option and you build your own appliances, you should take these numbers, these specifications as a reference to build your own appliance. So you can buy, I don't know, HPE, Lenovo, Dell, Huawei, whatever you want, and just make sure you simulate these specifications to be sure that you have enough processing power for running your software. Now I think we finished with the appliances. I can answer a couple of questions I have in chat if you want. So there are two questions from Eugene. One is about the clustering. So if we work with the concept of split brain or quorum, so the split brain is a typical situation when you have a storage cluster when two nodes that are communicating, they lose the communication in the middle, so they don't know what to do. In object storage, we don't have the concept of split brain. It works slightly differently. Let's imagine you have 3 nodes and 3 nodes. These 3 nodes are replicating depending on the policy. If the network goes down, then the three nodes they will work independently just to receive data from the different sides in case you write from both sides. I mean active. Whenever the network is getting back, they will synchronize to each other. And most likely what happens is that the last version of data will win and you keep the previous data as a previous version. So the service will be still working. That is in the case you use a synchronous application. If you go asynchronously, it's slightly different, but we can go deeper in this concept if you want. Maybe not today because we don't have too much time to go there. Second question is how Cloudian can facilitate data processing for MapReduce. So MapReduce is typically used in Hadoop or big data analysis. So what we do, for example, in the Hadoop space is S3 protocol can be used by Hadoop. There is a connector called S3A. Basically, you can create a virtual file system on top of S3. And this is where Hadoop can talk with the Hyperstore cluster to take data out to process and then to store back again. So basically, you virtualize the S3 with this S3 connector, S3A connector. So Hadoop can talk with S3 and make I/O of data to the S3 cluster. I hope I answered the questions. Of course, if you need anything deeper, feel free to contact me in private or to contact our SoftProm colleagues, and we will give you the full answer on that. So thank you. You can go ahead, Carsten. Yeah, that's good. It's just showing the appliances.
So we want to talk a little bit about use cases. This kind of shows where object storage or Cloudian is normally used. So on the top left-hand side, you see storage as a service. And we have actually 2 possibilities. The one is MSPs that offer their own service to their customers, so an S3 service. And as mentioned before, we have like Dataline in Russia, or out of the top 3 MSPs in Germany, we have like Plus Server and 1&1 that offer the service. So the idea is on the left-hand side, you have the client, you build it up locally in your data center, offer it under like your local laws, local marketing. You could do this very well in Poland. And then you also have the billing API, so you can build it the way you want it. And of course, you have the multi-tenancy feature. That's how it's built up. We also have very large enterprise customers. The typical one is Daimler, and also a lot of banks, same technology. They're using it internally and they're using it for different departments. So there a lot of times they're just like the service provider within big enterprise organization. And Daimler, for example, has 200 use cases on it, and they started with offering storage. Then they have Veeam use cases, backup use cases, but they also have a lot of other applications. So that's the nice thing. And the idea was really not to go to the cloud, but offer kind of the same technology to their internal customers. On the bottom side, the backup and archive, that's the traditional use case we see quite a lot. So you can have any of the common backup softwares that speaks S3, just put a few on there, like Veeam, Rubrik, Veritas, Commvault, but there's a lot of others. And the idea is that you keep the data that is very recent on the, I just pulled the Rubrik appliance, you keep it on the Rubrik appliance. The Rubrik appliance is very expensive. So what you do, you do it policy-based, you put everything after like 30 days on the Cloudian appliance. You can use also the ransomware or the object lock feature there to enable ransomware. And it gives you about a 70% cost saving if you would just use the technology, for example, of Rubrik themselves. So you have the same performance, but at 70% less cost. So that's normally the driver for the project. And then you can use the object storage also for other ones. We also have, for example, on our website, the use case for Swiss Post Finance. That is the bank of the Swiss Postal Service, and they're having a Splunk data, and they're using Cloudian to store the data. And we work very well with Splunk data, and it's just one example, but Splunk is a very nice use case. What we're also doing is we are integrated in the VMware Cloud Director. So you can, if you're a VMware customer, you can use the Cloud Director, integrate there. And we also offer a consumption model there. So that's a different topic. If you're really interested in that one, that could be interesting, then reach out to us or over SoftProm, and then we can discuss this a little bit further, but this would be too complex. And I turn it over to Roberto in a minute. So, and what we're just launched literally like a week ago, we're certified to an AWS Outpost. So the idea is that we're AWS ready. And what does it mean? If you would ask AWS for an on-premise storage, they would come with Outpost, and Outpost is very expensive because you have to buy this full rack, and it's also limited to 96 terabytes. So it is probably not useful for most use cases. And now you can build Cloudian, you buy it over SoftProm the normal way, and you can deploy Cloudian, but it's all certified. And you can start a lot smaller, and you can scale in the petabyte range, what you can't do with the Outpost offering that AWS have. So Roberto, maybe you want to also say anything on.
If you can go back one slide, maybe I can answer one question that was in the chat first, because we have the right slide to answer that. So the question was still from Eugene. Eugene is about what about data permission in object storage. You see here in the slide, there is a concept of multi-tenancy. There is a small box called multi-tenancy. Actually, what we do, what is done in the S3, in the object storage world, is that you create tenants. So the tenant is a logical concept, is like a user. You have two levels of tenants. There is the group admin, and the individual tenant, the user. So when you create a group admin, you delegate to this guy the ability to create individual users. So the group admin will have its own account. We use for storing, we have the credentials that call the secret key and the I think it's key, secret key. So you have the combination of basically login and password for storing data, but you also have login and password for accessing your GUI, for example. And you inside this GUI, you can see only your own resources. So we have many possibilities. You can not set any quota on resources. So everybody can just get in and create buckets using the whole capacity of the system, but you don't see other people's data. You just see what you create, your own bucket. And the group admin can create individual users, assigning them quotas, for example, 1 terabyte each, for example, and each user can see only its own data. So it's like you have your own login and password, and this can be integrated into an Active Directory, for example, or LDAP provider in S3, in object storage, of course, S3 Hyperstore. In case of hyperfile, is again a standard file system, so you can integrate with Active Directory, for example, and you can have the security of NFS or SMB. So that is the concept of multi-tenancy that applies to object storage, but applies also to the file world, to the hyperfile. Okay, I hope I answered the question from Eugene by that. So I think we are there. And then the second question was if there is a way to combine flash disk and normal storage together. Yes, the solution is to use tiering. So basically, you have in the same cluster, some nodes are flash and some nodes are not flash. And what you do, you can define some data to go on the flash nodes. For example, very high performance small data, they go on the flash nodes first, and then they tier to other nodes. And then normal data goes straight to the standard nodes. Right? I hope I answered your question, but feel free again to come back to me in case you need. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Next, just to put a note on the other part of the slides you see here, we also have integration with VMware Tanzu and OpenShift. You've read that. So this basically is a very specific use case for object storage, for S3 storage, as storage, a permanent storage for Kubernetes environments. So in this case, VMware Tanzu is the Kubernetes container approach of VMware. Is the, let's say, VMware normally works in virtual machines, but recently they introduced the concept of containers, so they also use containers. And Tanzu is their own, let's say, Kubernetes implementation for managing all the container in the VMware environment. We can be the storage target for this environment, so we can provide S3 storage for VMware inside the VMware vCloud. Sorry, VMware Cloud. What we can also do is that we can also use VMware vSAN storage as S3 storage. So imagine VMware has a lot of vSAN storage. We can put our software on top of that, and this vSAN block storage become S3 storage by using Hyperstore inside the VMware environment. It's a very specific use case, but can be interesting for wherever there is a DevOps or things like that. Other two, just very quick use cases. One is NAS file tiering. That is, for example, the situation when you already have a NAS in the customer environment, but your NAS is getting full and you don't want to invest too much. For example, your NAS is a flash one and it's too costly to buy another node or to expand. So what you can do, you might prefer to take some data off this NAS using a third-party software like Comprise, like Point software. Some NAS, they might also have their own integrated tiering engine. So in this case, in place of adding storage to the primary NAS, you tier data off the NAS and you store it on a private S3 cloud, so Hyperstore. By doing that, you keep only hot data on the NAS primary, and everything that is not, for example, used since a month can be taken off. You can define your policies, and this goes to another storage. Media and entertainment is a very specific use case. In this case, basically, we have large customers like NBC, US, and other television chains. They store the videos as S3 objects. So there is a complex workflow. There are many other pieces, components in the solution for media, but the key concept is that a video is a very good candidate to become an object because it's a very static kind of data, and you just store once and then you stream many, many times. Just to give you an example, the largest object storage today in the world is YouTube. YouTube is all the videos are objects. Okay, it's not based on Cloudian, it's based on YouTube proprietary technology, but is the largest object storage we can see and consume. So I'm done with that. You can go next, Carsten.
Sure. And then we have a couple of the TV stations in the US, and that there are hundreds of petabytes. So techno is really, media entertainment is a very strong use case. We also have a TV station in Japan. So if you look into any media video archive, it's a perfect. I mean, we have a lot of experience. We have a separate team just doing this. So that is kind of a very good use case. Also, what we're doing in the US is we have like police stations that use these body cams. So they're putting all the sheriff's department, they're putting all the data of these body cams on Cloudian. So these are just a few use cases. And I think we already talked a little bit about that one. I don't know if you want to go a little bit more in detail on that one, Roberto.
Maybe just a couple of notes just to complete overview. So what we do is that our solution, so Hyperstore, has the ability to lock individual objects. Okay, so you can do that by using any S3 application. You can just lock that specific object. That means the object cannot be modified or deleted. It's something called WORM, WORM. Now, in some specific use cases, like for example with Veeam and Commvault, these applications are able to set the lock by themselves. So what happens at Veeam, for example, can store some data in Hyperstore in S3 using S3 as a target, and then can say this piece of backup should not be modified for 90 days. Okay, so in this case, we have some integration APIs that, from the Veeam point of view, can lock the object, and nobody can delete the object for the time of the retention. And of course, the driver for that is to avoid any modification of data. That is very useful, for example, to fight against ransomware, because what happens is that if a malware gets into your infrastructure, the modern malwares are not targeting only primary data, but they also target backup data to prevent you to restore from a backup. So it's very important that your backup data is locked, cannot be modified at all. So you always have a safe copy to roll back. So that's just for you to understand. Object lock is a feature of our S3 solution, of our S3 storage. Can be used by any application, can be also used manually from our GUI, directly from the end users. So you can lock individual objects, no problems. You can lock a bucket, no problems. Just in case of Veeam and Commvault, we have this special integration that these guys can drive the retention from application point of view. And we are also developing that for other vendors. For example, we have HiQ, that is a very specific backup tool for Nutanix, that is developing this integration, and others will follow. Okay, thank you, Carsten. It's all yours.
Yeah, and I mean the driver for using Cloudian is a lot of times saving costs. So what we put together, and you find a lot more information on downloads on our website, is really saving costs, so total cost comparison. So the first one you see comparing on-premise storage versus public cloud, and we really saved. Here it says on 65% savings against the public cloud storage, but I would say what we're typically seeing is that we can deploy for about half of the cost of the large AWS, Google, and the others. And we see this a lot more, that the enterprise customers come to us and realize they're using the public cloud, and they're overspending, and they're seeing that they have double the bills, and they do a comparison, and it gets really interesting for them. So based on the appliances, and you have kind of the cut over at 300, 400 terabyte, where it gets kind of interesting. Below, it's a little bit tough because you need a lot of hardware, but then if you get in the 1, 2 or higher petabyte range, then it's very easy from a cost perspective. So I can just urge any larger enterprise organization or MSP to look at it and we can provide you with a lot of comparison there. And we, as said before, we have very large banks, we have very MSPs, and we have a very long list of companies that use us, also a lot of universities. What I also would compare here is comparing Cloudian against Ceph. So we see this a lot in universities. So for example, we have in Switzerland, we have a customer, it's a service provider owned by all the universities, and they're the biggest Ceph provider in Switzerland, but they said for the new project, object storage and S3 service and Veeam services for all the universities, it's going to get too complex, and we're rather going to do this with Cloudian because the technology is just a lot better, and it's also cost savings over what we spend with all the add-ons we have to throw in. And keep in mind, this is the largest Ceph player in Switzerland, and they made the decision for Cloudian. So if you currently have some Ceph environment, or then it's also worth definitely to have a talk to Cloudian, just on the cost perspective and the experience. And the same thing is tape. You can actually also save a lot on tape if you compare it to Cloudian. So we have also TCO report there on Cloudian. If you compare it to tape, with tape, I would say that it's going to be interesting how you calculate it, if you calculate the power and all these details, but you can do a whole lot more with object storage because you can just access the data a lot better. And that's what we see a lot with customers that switched over to Cloudian. And traditional tape is that they're saying, now I can utilize the data. I also feel a lot safer than pulling out a few-year-old tape, and it's just a lot faster. So if you're thinking about your tape storage, or if you want to upgrade it, or if there's a point where you need like a new tape equipment, then it's certainly a good idea also to look at Cloudian.